afternoon session. The session is called How to Inspire, Fire, or Move Challenging Volunteers. The presenter is Dana Litwin with Dana Litwin Consulting. She is based in San Francisco, and just an interesting fact is she has her own YouTube channel on volunteer leadership. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Dana.
Hi, welcome everyone. Thanks so much, Audrey, for moderating today. Welcome to Hold'em or Fold'em, How to Inspire, Fire, or Move Challenging Volunteers. And this does, in fact, fulfill number 6 of our 8 volunteer management practices, best practices that are a part of the grant cycle for those of you in the grant process with Volunteering Florida and all that good stuff. So this definitely counts as ongoing supervision and management learning units, just so that you understand where this fits in the big scheme of things for the convening this week. And kind of kicking it off, some specific objectives. Today, hopefully you walk away today with some specific communication strategies for dealing with different types of problematic people and situations. We're also going to cover some conflict resolution and really effective de-escalation methods, both to keep yourself calm and to keep the situation emotionally neutral. And we've got some handouts. Hopefully we have time to get to them and also get to some questions and discussions on evaluation techniques and some examples. And what I'd love to do as we go through and give you some of the basics of how to kind of Hogwarts hat sort people into different categories and personality types and communication styles that can sometimes be problematic, and how to evaluate people if the situation is serious enough to dismiss. I know we don't like the fire word, it seems harsh. Dismiss or inactivate somebody or move them around, or inspire them to be better and to be more connected to the agency. So some of these evaluation tools to have in your toolbox. Quick question. This is more of an informal question, so you can put this in the chat or use the emojis at the bottom of your screen. Are you okay with confrontation in difficult conversations, or do you do everything possible to avoid it? So I'll give everyone a few moments to answer that in the chat or with emojis, and my moderators can tell me how that's going. So as we get the answers, go ahead.
I was going to say that there are a lot of people who seem to be okay with it.
Good.
Or could be okay with it.
Or could be okay with it. Excellent. Yeah, sometimes that can be a real point of anxiety for us as leaders of volunteers of confrontation or having these difficult conversations. So that's definitely a good skill to have. But yeah, the most common response to conflict is avoidance. And one of the ways that I've been kind of useful in my previous career with different agencies is they would call me the hammer, because I'm pretty good at having difficult conversations that turn out to be a win-win for everybody and don't end in tears. I kind of became the go-to person, whether it was really my job or not, to have these difficult conversations. So that's part of how I learned these techniques we're hearing today. Is I was the hammer. I was like, I'm a gentle hammer, like a velvet hammer. So some of you may be a little bit familiar, but the kind of foundation of anything that I teach or any way that I design programs for clients and for agencies is the 3 C's of happy volunteers. And just think about it as we're always working into our programs the idea of everybody's comfort, convenience, and connection to the work, to the mission, to the agency, and to each other. So I'll just reference these a little bit, but this is a great foundational system to think about. It can be a sticky note on your computer with just the words comfort, convenience, connection to remind you to always weave that through all of the planning and strategy and program design that you're doing. But that, if I refer to that, that's kind of a foundational structure. And maybe you've seen me do the 3 C's of happy volunteers as an entire webinar before. But if we come back to comfort, convenience, connection, those are some easy touchstones for us. And what happens is when people know that you're thinking about their comfort, their convenience, and their connection, then they feel safe, they feel comfortable enough to commit. And this also has a really positive effect on risk management and problem solving in general. If you are using the 3 C's as you're screening people, onboarding them, they're always having fairly positive interactions with you and other paid staff members and other volunteers and the culture of the agency, that automatically makes it less likely that you'll need to fire, dismiss, inactivate somebody for an incident down the line. And an easy way to think about the categories of comfort, convenience, connection is they have some T words attached to them to kind of break it down. So under comfort, we want people to be comfortable with the tasks that they're doing, with the training that they've received, that they understand it and they're comfortable with it and they can commit to it. Temperature means literal physical temperature. I've worked a lot with zoos and parks and outside conservation and wildlife agencies, but also the emotional temperature is the work that you're doing with your agency inherently very, very stressful. In addition to all the other stressors that we're all going through right now, is your agency prone to compassion fatigue? So thinking about the emotional temperature, the culture of where you are, in addition to the physical temperature of inside or outside, day or night. And of course, all of our teams run on their stomach. So tummy and the other very basic comfort of life, toilet. So a little bit of a giggle point, but the task, training, temperature, tummy, toilet, always have those things in mind when you're designing roles or placing people into different tasks and positions. Convenience, really the biggest barriers to anyone volunteering are going to be time and transportation. And that really boils down to very often economic barriers. Someone is working too much to volunteer their time, that's fine. People have to survive. But particularly in uncertain economic times, sometimes there are folks who do want to do more volunteering if they're not working full time or just to kind of help deal with stress by helping somebody else, because that gives us a really good feeling. But thinking about whether shifts are set, people can self-schedule things like that, time and transportation. And really connection is about building trust with your volunteers, your entire team of paid and unpaid people in your agency. And the idea that you're all in this together. There's no us and them. There's no paid staff versus volunteers. That's a pretty toxic culture. It's very common, but it shouldn't be. And if you think about the 3 C's all the time in how you're dealing with folks and how you're designing their activities, you're actually going to stave off a lot of the problems. However, we often inherit programs that we haven't designed ourselves or that we don't have a lot of power to change. And there might be some people that you inherit as well. So I have this Goldilocks scale of when people are interested in volunteering. You have kind of 3 basic energy and interaction levels with them. It's pretty easy to identify the flake, the people that just don't get back to you enough, or you feel like you have to hound them. Nope, let them go. Flaky people aren't worth our time. Hopefully we all know that by now. But I also want to warn you against someone who comes on too strong, because they probably have their heart in the right place for wanting to help, but they may not have good self-awareness around their boundaries and their bandwidth to take things on. So an example would be of a high energy, high intensity person who wants to overcommit, the person who wants to do a lot of different roles to start off with, instead of starting in one role or one job or one position or one shift of something and then building up to see how it works out. They kind of want to do everything at once. And so that actually speaks to them, one, maybe not having self-awareness, not being able to decide what their priorities are, and not having good boundaries. And it seems really exciting at first because we love that enthusiasm and we want to channel it. However, in the long run, that's going to be someone who's really going to burn out fast and probably end up taking more time and energy from you and the rest of your leaders of volunteers managing their ups and downs, and when they take on too much and can't do anything really well. So we want to keep in the Goldilocks zone with someone who is just right, that middle zone, where they are pretty good at communicating with you in the onboarding and screening process. They are keeping their commitments to trainings or their first shifts, and they don't seem to be taking on more than they can handle. And they ask for help or support ask questions as they need to. So again, if we start off with a good foundation of comfort, convenience, connection, and onboarding people who are more in this Goldilocks zone, then we're going to have less incidences or problems or conflicts down the line. So in that just right zone, that's also probably where we're going to get the people who can become leaders themselves, other volunteers, where we can develop their leadership skills, who are kind of balanced in how they approach things and balanced in, they have a strong commitment to the agency and they're good at boundaries and communication and taking on the correct amount that they can handle. Those are also the ones to really keep in mind for leadership positions as they come up. So how do you make this choice? There's been a problem, something has happened. Do we inspire someone? Do we fire, dismiss, inactivate, or do we move them? So ideally, you already have these things in place. It's absolutely essential to have clear written policies, a volunteer handbook or a program manual internally and externally for staff and volunteer leaders, and for volunteer and the public to see a handbook, internally to see a manual, that there is the proper training and support so people understand what's expected of them, and that we are creating situations where we are not just setting up expectations, but we're meeting or exceeding those expectations, because nobody wants to fail and nobody likes a bait and switch. My favorite phrase for, if you have to have one sentence about volunteer engagement and volunteer management, it's that every interaction with a volunteer is an invitation to stay or an invitation to go. And the tagline to that for this presentation is, it's okay to ask people to go when it's time to go. The rest of the time, we want to create that welcoming, supportive, well-organized, well-structured situation for them to succeed. And setting people up for success means that we are fair and consistent in how we are enforcing the written policies that should be written in to the policies themselves. A quick thumbs up, thumbs down. Here's a quick unofficial poll. How many of you have written handbooks or volunteer program manuals right now with your agencies? And we'll get some responses, because everybody wants to succeed. How are those looking?
Really good. There's definitely more people are trending in the thumbs up, which means that they have them or probably have at least started. Very few, like 6, have a thumbs down.
Great. And if you do not have one yet, a lot of great templates exist. I know Volunteer Florida has some great templates. I have some great templates. You have my information, so I'm happy to share these resources with you, because sometimes it's hard to start from a blank page. So we're here for you. Trust, we're on this together. We're connected to this. So a quick review of when to hold them and when to fold them is you want to hold off on punishing or moving or dismissing someone if in your investigation of the information it's a personal feud. That's never right. It's not legal. It's not ethical. It's icky. You can warn someone that if they have violated these written standards of conduct, rules, guidelines, regulations, whatever you're working with, there should be a process written in your manual or handbook about, 3 strikes, you're out, whatever the case may be, that you have a warning conversation, you put that in their record, and they know exactly what they need to do to change their behavior or their attitude or their actions to have success, and what happens if they don't fix the problem that's occurring. And you definitely can fold someone. You can fold them out. You can dismiss them. You can inactivate them. You can fire them for very, very bad behavior. And that means, again, according to your code of conduct, rules, policies that are written out that people are trained in, that can be one very, very bad incident that's like instantly bad and so egregious that they've got to go right now. Or it can be a build-up pattern where they've had some warnings, but they've broken them. So think about hold, warn, or fold. And something that has happened often in my career, and probably a lot of you have been through, where it really boils down to a personality conflict or personal drama or a beef with staff or other volunteers. And technically, no one's crossed a line or done anything wrong. They just don't like each other. And we don't want to fire somebody or punish them just because one of the other personalities in the mix um, doesn't work well with them. That's an indication to probably move somebody around, or if you have to, if it's a little politically delicate of a situation, if the people you're dealing with are also donors or they're volunteers as board members or in a Friends of or a Citizens Advisory Committee, it may also not quite be your place to make that decision. Again, even as I was an entry level baby volunteer coordinator some decades ago, people realized I was really good at having calm but serious and sincere conversations about personal conflicts. So it was not my pay grade to be the one firing a lot of the volunteers. I was an entry level coordinator. I had managers and directors above me at the time, but I did it. But part of that was I learned that, that's not for me to do. That's not a decision for me to make. That needs to go up the chain of command to make that decision. So don't, even if you're good at it, don't let people make you the hammer if that's not really your role to deal with that person just because you happen to be good at it. And a lot of us are. So warning, again, document everything. There have to be very specific and well understood from the conversation that you're having with the person about the incident or the situation, and that all of this is carefully and precisely aligned with your rules and policy. This is this really protects the agency, and it protects you, and it protects the volunteers, that everything's applied evenly. A really serious incident could be somebody is causing, property damage, physical harm, being really verbally abusive to other volunteers or a staff member. Usually, showing up high or drunk or otherwise impaired, and that's usually serious enough to get rid of somebody on the spot. Or it could just be a pattern of problems and the resulting consequences. Again, just make sure it's applied evenly to everybody, and that it's not about personality conflict or drama that people used to be friends or they used to date and that fell apart. Then you just might need to move people around to different shifts. Well, here's a conundrum that I've been in way too often. I was asked when I was interviewed for an agency for a job that I did get many years ago. In the interview process, I was asked if I'd be willing to fire a founder of the agency that was a former board member, but now was a volunteer. And my answer was, I need a lot more information before I answer this question. And it turned out that it took me 2 years, but I realized that that person didn't really need to be fired. They just had a very, very abrasive communication style, and they didn't get along with certain other people on the board and among staff. And I just had to kind of manage those communications and teach them all some better communication and conflict resolution and discussion techniques. And that person ended up being great, understood how their behavior was setting other people off, changed it. The other people involved also changed their behavior. But someone who can't be fired by you is if it's, quite frankly, discriminatory, if it's because of them just as a person, of their gender presentation or what body they're born into or what abilities they're born with neurologically or physically. And also that it could be a political hot potato if you're outside of the worries of firing because of discrimination or bigotry or sexism, then there could be a real political hot potato. Again, someone could be a donor. It just may not be your job to fire them. And we want to make sure that we're well within labor laws when we're dealing with volunteers as well as paid staff. There are some somewhat more serious consequences, of course, with HR violations, but we want it to be as consistent as possible for the whole team to be able to abide by the same rules, guidelines, code of conduct, whether they're staff or volunteers. It shouldn't be separate. So I've broken down kind of some personality or communication styles into a few archetypes, into a few standards. These overlap a lot. Someone can be a mix of this, but they each have a slightly different strategy to resolve the problem. The one at the end, you probably know the strategy already pretty well. So types of challenging volunteers. The entitled. How many of you have run into this volunteer who's like, I've been here longer than you. I have been here longer than staff. I know how this goes better than everybody. This is how I've always done it. That can be one approach of someone who's been there a long time. It can also be someone who somehow got through the screening process, even if they're a new volunteer and they think that they instantly know everything or they're entitled to special treatment, things like that. So if you want to put a thumbs up or thumbs down if you've had to deal with that person, yes, you've had to deal with this personality type or this communication style. Thumbs down if you've been fortunate enough never to encounter it. I think I know how that's going to go. So go ahead.
Yeah, definitely lots of thumbs up.
Yeah. This is why this is broken down to these 6 types of people, because these are the most common things I've discovered. So the tactics for this, it seems counterintuitive, but you actually do want to build up their ego a little bit. You want them to understand that they're valued, and there are very clear boundaries that they must also still obey the rules, guidelines, code of conduct, safety measures that everyone else has in place as well. But they thrive on recognition and praise. The good news is that underneath what can be an off-putting attitude or arrogance or entitlement, they are really passionate about the mission. They're very invested in the agency, and it works really well with entitled people to. Some people like the compliment sandwich, some people don't, but kind of praise their value and their ego, give a really specific piece of feedback for the incident you're dealing with, very specific instructions and feedback, and then another little praise like, and we appreciate how invested you are with the agency, that you're so passionate about this, and we need you to not raise your voice in meetings at so-and-so, whatever the incident might be. It seems counterintuitive, but you want to pat them on the head and stroke their ego a little bit, and they'll come around. The expert, more thumbs up or thumbs down while I explain the expert. They sometimes are really an expert on something, and that's okay, and we can use that. But a lot of the time they're not, and they're just blowing some hot air, and it's not really useful information, or it's not factually correct. So let's get those thumbs up, thumbs down if you've had to deal with an expert. And the expert and the entitled often do overlap. They're sometimes in the same person, and they have similar tactics. How's our thumbs up, thumbs down doing for the expert so far?
No, still a lot of thumbs up.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I figure.
There's no crying emoji, so hopefully that's a good sign.
There's the laughter crying, but yeah, you're right. There's no crying emoji. We might add that later on. So the thing with the expert is, if you think that they might actually have a valuable insight, great, listen to them. If in listening to them, they don't really have the correct information, or they don't have anything helpful to add to the conversation or the situation, then we move on to, can we inspire them to tone down their bragging or tone down what they think they know, or can we just move them and redirect their energy into a special project? If what they're doing as an expert is cutting down other people, like, well, that's not correct, even though this person's wrong, I have the correct answer, then that actually moves to a warning. Then if they're cutting down actual expertise by other volunteers or staff, other people on the team, and putting out incorrect information, then that does take a warning or retraining or redirect of their energy. But we want to ideally use, because their expertise often also is a sign of they want to be more involved. They want to be even more engaged. They want to be recognized. So we can train them to be a true expert in something, and then they can really use that recognition in a positive way for the agency. Oh, the drama queen or king. a drama vortex, gossipy drama, stirring things up. We can give our thumbs up, thumbs down to people who have had to deal with this. I think I know the answers already, kind of rhetorical questions. And this can take a lot of time and energy. This can be really draining. So the tactics for the drama queen or king are very, very, very clear boundaries, communication training. And I recommend that a really good thing just to do, if you can set it up in your agency, if it's not already a common practice, is about once a year or whenever there's a big influx of new staff or a bunch of new volunteers, depending on how your teams are set up. About once a year, I liked to do just a general in-service communication training. And I often do this for my agencies because I have some of that background, or you can bring in somebody else. But if someone is really gossiping or causing drama, that needs a specific conversation and training and a redirect. But again, we want to inspire that energy because they're creating a lot of energy and engagement, to talk about positive things, to frame things in a positive way. And if you can't, or if the way that they are causing drama is genuinely harmful to people, negative, toxic, creating really bad morale on the team, and it's just going to make it worse if you try to move them to another team, that's when we can use the F word, fire them, or dismiss them or inactivate them according to your policy. Because if it's that bad, they probably are violating, a verbal abuse or some other kind of policy as you go. But it can take so much energy. Stop wasting energy on them, try to redirect them, and then if that doesn't work, get them out of there. Okay, who's had to deal with the Grumposaurus? Always complainy, always curt, always gruff with people, never seems happy. How many Grumposaurus encounters have we had out there? Thumbs up, thumbs down. So the Grumposaurus, the Oscar the Grouch, with all apologies to Sesame Street and Henson Studios, the tactic is actually to inspire them. And the Grumposaurus was the person in that job interview that I was asked to fire. She was a Grumposaurus. She just had had a very pessimistic approach to things and had many years of frustration of the agency's policies and what they would and wouldn't do building up. And that had led to her being extremely grumpy and short with people. But she never crossed the line in being toxic and abusive, thank goodness. So we want to actually inspire the Grumposaurus. They may be grumpy because they don't like their role and they're not a good fit in it. And it may be better, they may be less grumpy if we move them within the agency, or if we invite them to move to even a partner agency or doing something completely different. But generally, they're grumpy because they're frustrated. They want to give more to the agency. They want the agency to do something, and they're often very frustrated about it, or there's other stressors in their lives. It's really important that you don't take their grumpiness personally, especially if they aren't personally attacking you or their staff, if they're just kind of grumbly and complainy. And again, it comes back to an all staff, an all team, all volunteer training on communication styles, and that ideally you set up a culture of communicating in a respectful manner, and you set up a culture that's not gossipy or negative in how people communicate, and that people feel safe giving genuine feedback to you or to their on-site direct supervisors. That if you can help set up training and create that culture where communication can be honest and doesn't get to the point of frustration if something needs to be fixed, that's going to go a long way. How are we doing for how many people have encountered our Grumposaurus, Audrey?
Definitely a lot of thumbs up. There's a little more thumbs down than normal. But some comments are like, sometimes these people can have all of these traits at different times.
Right. And you'll notice that that's an excellent point. That's absolutely true. And depending on what is the dominant trait in the problem or the situation that you're immediately dealing with them, you'll notice that a lot of these tactics overlap and are the same. So it gets down to, is there the 3 C's: comfort, convenience, connection. Do they have the right training? Can we do some more training? Are they in the right role? Do we need to move them around? Or have they absolutely crossed a line and they're just not good for the agency anymore? Everyone's got a life cycle with the agency as a volunteer, as a team member. And, every invitation and every moment's an invitation to stay or go. And it's okay if it's just not working out for them anymore, they can go. But yeah, this is pretty typical. Okay, the rebel without a clue. This one is tough because this is a little different from Grumposaurus. This is someone who is a contrarian. They want to push back against any kind of authority, any kind of rules, any kind of changes. They want to do things their own way independently, which can be good, but they're doing it in a manner that is disruptive, that's harming morale, that's harming other people, that's harming the agency, the brand of the agency. If they're like, I don't understand, man, you're not the boss of me. It's like, well, actually, technically I am. So how to deal with a rebel. And I'm actually very independent, which is why I like to work for myself. But when I've been with agencies, the ones where I've done the best is when I'm not being micromanaged, where my expertise is trusted. So again, just have a conversation, do a little mini check-in with a person, and do they have a genuine piece of feedback that can be helpful about a change that isn't working for them or that they're concerned about? They might be able to solve that with them. But in general, it could be that they're feeling micromanaged. If they are an expert in a good way, not in the bad expert full of hot air way, but if they're not feeling trusted, so that's part of that connection to the agency, is that sense throughout the team of trust and that we're in this together. And a little bit of, I call them verbal judo or Jedi mind tricks, where we want to have a calm conversation. We're going to get to that in a second on how to do that, and really there's ways to get people to abide and do things by having them think it's their idea. We're going to get into those tactics a little deeper, and you can also contact me afterwards for some specifics. But ultimately, we want to remind them of their why. Why are they doing this work with the agency? What's their inspiration? We want to get to the core of their why. And if they're not feeling connected to the agency anymore, and we cannot find common ground with them and remind them of the common goals that they have in their role with the agency and doing the work, then we can start to just warn about behavior. Like, hey, this isn't, pushing back on this isn't going to change. We've tried to have conversations, but if this isn't the right fit for you, they can invite them to go or fire if it's becoming like really, really abusive or tough to deal with. Okay, who knows how to deal with a flake? They're gone. We don't waste time with flakes. Hopefully you've all learned this lesson the easy way and not the hard way. But yeah, just like at the beginning, if someone is turning up late all the time and you've had conversations and it's not something that is a time or transportation barrier or something that can be fixed, or they're just missing shifts without calling in, then yeah, no one's got time for that. Clearly, they're not connected enough to the agency. And if a quick check-in conversation is not answered, and they've dropped off the radar, then that's it. Another good practice, hopefully you're all doing it, is to about once a year or so, sometimes more often, just go through the volunteer database or your personnel records and just see if you don't do it more often. I used to like to do it once a month or quarterly, depending on the agency I was with and how many people I had on my team, of like who's really keeping up with their hours and who isn't. And if someone is falling off their shifts and not doing what they're supposed to do, yes, check in with them. There's a lot of life priorities right now. We might need to use compassion and grace because there's a lot of other life priorities right now. But if someone's been kind of flaky from the get-go, or you inherited a flake, just don't feel bad about letting them go and dismissing them. They get the F word. The flake gets the fire. Another quick informal poll: are you the hammer? Have you been put in that position where you're the one who most often has to fire or dismiss or inactivate a volunteer, or is that someone else? So if you're the hammer, thumbs up. If that falls to someone else and you haven't had to do it very much, thumbs down. And if you like being the hammer, clap emoji. How's that looking so far? Moderators, Audrey?
Definitely more people have a thumbs up than a thumbs down. We did get one person with the clap emoji. Oh, a couple people coming in with the clap
Yeah,
emoji.
I'm the hammer.
Kudos
That's
to
okay.
you.
So I have this picture just so we can. We've talked about some heavy things. We're actually going to get into in a minute next how to have these difficult conversations. So I just wanted to show you a really nice feel-good picture of some kids and a volunteer doing something fun. So this is just our take a breath. We've talked about some heavy stuff, and we're going to get into some stuff too. Tips on tough talks. I have a video on this, just a little 5-minute video on my priceless advice for leaders and volunteers. It's one of my Tuesday tips of how to have this tough talk. The main thing is that you stay emotionally neutral. If you find your heart racing and your skin flushing and you're getting upset and you're having a really intense negative emotional response to the conversation, that's not going to help. So some of it is practicing being grounded, taking deep breaths, and coming into starting a conversation, staying as emotionally neutral as possible. Be very, very specific in the agenda of the conversation and stick to it. Ask and do active listening. You may very well get new information from a conversation in a tough talk about an incident or a conflict that you didn't know before. And it may be revealed that it is a personal beef, or it's not as serious as you thought, or the volunteer is the correct person and they're frustrated that because they're a volunteer, a staff's word is being taken over them. There could be a lot of things that we want to absorb with active listening. When in doubt, don't say anything. Let the person tell their side of the story, vent, kind of get it out, and that will actually help release the emotional energy for both of you. If you are trying to counter their point, don't resist that urge. Again, find common ground. What's their why? How can they still contribute to the goals of the agency and their work? And really try to inspire them with what you're hearing in the conversation. How to keep yourself calm and neutral in this situation. How you hold your body, how you breathe is going to go a really long way to your autonomic nervous system not creating an adrenaline rush or a fight or flight or that high stress reaction. So open body language. If you're sitting there with your arms crossed and your legs crossed and a stern face, that's going to set the mood in the wrong way. Status in this case, and I have again videos on priceless advice, you can watch these few-minute videos, means just being still, that you're not fidgeting, that you're not poking a pen or tapping a leg. Again, before and even during, if you feel your own adrenaline or emotional level rising, take 10 deep breaths. This is a really funny technique. It absolutely works. It works for stage fright. It works for having tough conversations. It grounds, again, it physically grounds you. Scrunch your toes in your shoes. Unless you work barefoot, scrunch your toes on the ground. And again, just really work on not taking things personally, even if they're calling names or they're being very upset in the meeting. It's really more about the other person and their reactions than it is about anything that you have personally done, most likely. And again, just this idea of asking and listening. People want to feel valued and heard. All of us do. That's part of the comfort, convenience, and particularly the connection with our team members, with volunteers, paid or unpaid people that we're working with. Sometimes an incident has occurred because no one's been listening so far. And maybe they've done a poor job of how they've tried to communicate their grievances, but if you ask and listen, that can resolve quite a lot. And there are entire workshops and books on active listening, so seek those out if you don't already know about active listening. But this is just a really easy slide for reference. Active listening has to do with, again, not speaking, listening, really hearing and listening, and not thinking about what you're going to say next. Asking questions and really mirroring what the person said. So if they said, I don't feel like John listens to me when we're working shifts together and I'm the supervisor of our task. Like, okay, what I'm hearing is that you're frustrated that John isn't listening to you. So literally saying their words back to them to make sure that you're clear on things, again, goes a long way to people understanding that they are possibly finally being heard, being valued, being listened to. And that helps you get to factual information that isn't only wrapped up in a big emotional mess. again, the tactic to all of these types of incidents is, can we remind people of our common ground, our goals, and their why with the agency? If their why is changed, if they feel disconnected, there's oftentimes a situation where a volunteer really doesn't want to be doing this anymore, but they're ashamed to say so, or they're embarrassed to say so, or they don't want to have that uncomfortable conversation. So in these conversations where you find common ground and goals, if their common ground and their goals have shifted or their priorities have shifted, handle that with grace and compassion and just, gently let them go. If their behavior has crossed a line, not so gently let them go as well. But ultimately, we want to inspire people for that win-win, that they feel good coming out of the conversation. It's resolved to, the greater good for the agency, for them, for the work you're doing, and for the whole team. And this also models that if you're handling conflicts and incidents with challenging people consistently, everybody else sees that, and they start to understand that, yes, this is a culture where things are fair, where there are rules and there's good training, and I'm not being singled out because of how I look or who I am, or what I believe, if I'm going along with the correct guidelines of the agency and I'm focused on my work. So this really is modeling behavior for everyone else on your team, staff and volunteers, and for people to understand that they can have that trust and that sense of, we're in this together. Cool. Any questions so far? I want to leave a little bit of time. There's a handout that you can go over, and depending on how many people are tuned in, we can actually answer some direct situations that you might have. If you want to put in the chat, we can help solve some stuff with the wisdom in the room. You can ask questions of what I've gone over so far, or we can use the rest of the time to start to do some practice scenarios of whether you inspire, fire, or move a challenging person if we don't have our own scenarios. So I'll let the chat and Q&A go ahead for that.
Yep, we have some questions in the question and answer portion. If you wanted to read those, or if you would like me to read them to you, which is your preference. I'm not for sure if you can see the Q&A.
Oh, yep, I do now. Organizational change is a big challenge. If someone isn't seeing the handout, I think the audience can go to chat, Q&A, or handouts, but also Volunteer Florida or I can directly email you the PDF if you can't see the handout in the handout section here. So I'm going to do these questions as I see them. So the first one is, how do you address a drama king or queen when they also are charismatic and have several people on the team supportive of them? That's a great question, Laura. And the answer is that you inspire them to be a better leader. You take the fact that they are admired by people and that are charismatic, and you have a conversation with them that, hey, we admire that you're a natural leader, and here are some communication techniques, or here are some things that we want to emphasize that you do or change to better align with the work you're doing with the agency and to align with our guidelines. So that's one way to handle the drama queen or king. And that kind of related question with Adina, hopefully I'm saying your name correctly, how can you discuss their bragging for an entitled person or an expert or sometimes a drama king without insulting them? And that's part of that verbal judo and kind of Jedi mind trick where you can address that, you can recognize their expertise in something and really clearly communicate to them when and where and how they're sharing that information and bragging, and say, you know what, we recognize your expertise in this. Talking about it in such a way has not inspired the other team members. Here are some ways that I think you can share your passion for the agency without accidentally off-putting other people. The thing with the experts and the entitled and the drama kings or queens is that they have rarely had anybody call them on their stuff. And sometimes it can make them defensive, but other times it's just kind of a surprise. And it's very often a lack of self-awareness with that person. They don't know that they're off-putting because they maybe do have some followers or they are charismatic. They don't understand the potential harm that they're doing, or the disruption that they're causing. So again, having an emotionally neutral conversation with very specific feedback is usually the way to solve for that. Also, if you look up verbal judo, if you actually look that up, there are courses on that. I've done a couple of tips on it, but there are deep workshops and webinars specifically about that kind of de-escalation and non-confrontational language and ways to deal with that. And there's books on that as well, if that's how you prefer learning, that I recommend. Should difficult conversations always include, this is from Laura, for Laura, should difficult conversations always include another person besides the person being counseled? Ideally, yes, if you have enough people to go around and you have someone else who can stay neutral, it can work just kind of to have a witness, especially if you are pretty sure that the conversation is going to end with their dismissal or a really serious consequence. It's good to have someone else in the room. The way that that can backfire is that can also have someone have the person at the center of the incident, the volunteer, it can make them feel more defensive or more attacked. So it kind of comes to individual situation, individual judgment. It may be also written into your policy. It's actually a pretty good best practice that if you have to have a potential firing or a conflict resolution, that there are at least one other person is in that conversation who can help moderate, facilitate, stay neutral, and just make sure that that person, whether they're staff or a volunteer, is on the same page as you. Again, not that you're going to interrogate or punish this person, but that they can help maintain that emotionally neutral tone to the conversation. Karen, yes, organizational change is absolutely the biggest challenge. How to help volunteers adapt? The easiest answer is be transparent. Be absolutely transparent and honest with why the changes are occurring, how volunteers can be involved with helping those changes occur. So get them engaged and involved with that as much as you can. And be honest. Sometimes we're caught in the middle where we don't like the organizational change, especially there was a lot of really bad decisions, quite frankly, terrible, short-sighted decisions made at the beginning of the pandemic to furlough leaders of volunteers, to stop volunteer programs, to do that. And I've had conversations with even clients and many colleagues where that wasn't communicated properly to the staff leading volunteers or to the volunteers themselves. So clear communication as to the why the changes are in place, and then seeing how you can get buy-in and engagement or assistance from the volunteers. And again, if people are really frustrated with it, there's whole workshops and webinars and books about organizational change management that you can dive into if you want those specifics. Clarissa talks about a long-term and entitled and expert volunteer is asked to leave, had a flat-out refusal to follow the rules, so also sounds like a little bit of rebel without a clue. When he was approached, he went on a rampage to anyone who would listen and even told his spouse that she could not serve in a committee. Long story short, he came back last week to ask if he could return. He can't. My question is, how do I have that tough conversation knowing it may set him off again? He's fired. Why are you talking to him? Quite frankly. And Clarissa, feel free to answer. Like, no, he can't come back. He's done. Consider him gone. And that's in his record that he's 86th from the agency. If he's crossed that many lines and refused to follow the rules, that also leads into the next question, which I'll get into in a second, that, yeah, no, bad behavior doesn't come back, period. No matter how long they've been there or how valuable it is, certain lines can't be crossed. It's not fair to the agency. It's not fair to the other volunteers and team members and staff members. And he doesn't get to do that. There's real life consequences to that. Then Robin has a really great related question. How do you deal with volunteer retribution after they've been dismissed? That may get into law enforcement. It depends on what's happening with retribution. If someone has been dismissed in a way, or they're just, not a good person, they're not mentally or emotionally balanced, they are naturally a mean person, which probably wasn't a great fit for your organization to the first place. If you have to, get law enforcement involved, get restraining orders. I've I've had that happen with employees, and I've seen it, not mine directly. I've seen it happen with dismissed volunteers where they are not of sound mind. They are not emotionally balanced. They need help beyond what you or an agency can give them to balance out their responses in life. And real people need to understand that there are real consequences. Everyone is very stressed out, very on edge. We've all gone through a collective trauma of the pandemic and many other circumstances, hurricanes, wildfires. You know, there's weather and climate circumstances. There's political circumstances. People are on edge. That still doesn't give anybody the right to take it out on other volunteers, on the agency, on you, any more than, you know, I have the right to go harangue my neighbors because I'm having a bad day. So people need to understand that there are still fair and consistently applied consequences to their action. But yeah, don't be afraid to call a sheriff, call police. I know that can be tricky because police response isn't always appropriate. Or if you think that it's necessary, get, you know, social worker or mental health people involved if you think that that person is really going to be a danger to themselves. So, and Clarissa's clarifying, thank you, comes into the store to make purchases and the staff lets them just do whatever. The issue is the management act as if they cannot tell them no. That is how we ended up with it in the first place. So Clarissa, that becomes a conversation between you and the management that hopefully they listen and say, this person is a genuine problem. They could be a genuine threat. This is a liability issue. The minute you bring up that something might be a liability or a legal issue, the way that they're allowing it, that usually, for upper management, that usually is a good way to get their attention. Like, this can be endangering. Allowing him to be here can be endangering other people. And if you want to have a quick conversation, you can contact me and we can follow up and have an email or a quick phone call if you want to run some specific scenarios. But hopefully that helps. Brad, is there a point where you take a group of inspirers and break them apart to spread momentum? Yes. Yeah, actually. Make them leaders. If someone is great and inspiring and a leader, and they're doing great on their team, and their leadership qualities are getting better being on that team, don't do it without their permission, but check in with them as a team and individually and say, hey, you are also great. Can I shift you to training other volunteers? Can I shift you to leading other teams? If they really want to stick together as a team, don't break that up. That's going to just cause bad will. But invite them into more leadership positions and to inspire other people on your team, because staff get inspired too. There's no magical see-through wall between staff and volunteers. If they see an inspirational person doing inspirational work, it doesn't matter if they're paid or unpaid, if they're on the same team, they're going to be inspired by that person. So yeah, invite them and develop them into leadership positions. I'm going to pop over to the chat because I think we're done with our Q&A. So if you can get to the handouts, and there should be a little thing that all the audience can see, that there's a handout, there's a PDF of the slides that I've done so far. We've just done that. And there's also the PDF of some practice scenarios. I think all of you have some pretty good real life scenarios and situations to address. But if you want to use the handout, the worksheet that's here, for yourself or for colleagues that couldn't make it to this training, or if there's other staff members that you want to include in the conversation and share this information about Inspire, Fire, Dismiss, or Move, Challenging People, absolutely share these worksheets and practice with these scenarios. And I'm happy to give you a follow-up by email if you contact and reach out to me, which is here. How I resolved. All of these are real situations that I have handled and that have answers that I've given to them, but they may have different answers from you in your situation. So feel free to do that. A few more minutes here, and I'm going to pop over to the chat just to see how we're doing. Any other questions that people have in the last few minutes? How are we doing, moderators?
Yeah, I show we have 5 more minutes left.
Great. So I'm going to actually circle back to a little bit more about the 3 C's and a little bit more about verbal judo and kind of de-escalating conversation. And if you have a Q&A or you want to put another question in the chat, moderator Audrey or Lizzie, just pipe in with what's going on. So people do commit when they have comfort, convenience, and connection. If somebody there's a lot of embarrassment or saving face or shame that can be a barrier to a volunteer or any team member bringing up a problem. So one of the best de-escalation or verbal judo techniques that you can use to keep this sense of comfort, convenience, connection, and safety in speaking to you is acknowledging the fact that they're willing to have a difficult conversation or that they're bringing something difficult to you. We don't ever want to punish people for bringing something up or for being willing to participate in a conversation because it does get personal and it's easy for folks to get defensive, and it's easy to, if someone's already a drama king or queen, to spin things out and to be really reactive. So we want to acknowledge that they are doing something brave and that we value the conversation and the time and their willingness to have it. That's a great kind of opener to a conversation like this before we start to actively listen. Under comfort, convenience, and connection, if you just start to say and reframe things that, however it's been before, you are definitely thinking about your entire team's comfort, convenience, and connection. Sometimes just hearing that out loud, that someone values them, cares, is listening, that can shift a lot of behavior. That can de-escalate a lot of frustration. There's always going to be, in any population of humans, troublesome people, people who are unbalanced, who don't have the support in the rest of their life that they need around the stressors that they have and the things they have to do. And again, as much as we can muster in our own stress levels, which are very high right now, mustering that sense of compassion, respect, and grace in our interactions, that's going to go a long way to all of this. And wherever you are in the process, if you've inherited some troublesome people, don't be afraid to start that conversation. Don't be afraid to start to write out a policy change if you do need guidelines, if you need a stronger match between staff and employee handbook and volunteer program and handbook, making sure that the same standards of behavior, the same following of the rules, the same policies and procedures apply to the entire team. May or may not be within your power to do that, but starting those conversations up the chain of command and bringing an awareness to why it's so important to have volunteers in the right role, inspired, makes it lower the risk to the agency, legally, liability, physically, and just creates a better culture and dynamic for the whole team. So we've got, I think, one more question and 1 more minute. Oh, no questions. Cool. How are we doing in chat? So far, so good, everybody. Here's my contact information again, and you can contact all these fine folks, Audrey and Jovita and everyone, and Lizzie at Volunteer Florida. Absolutely feel free to email me. I am on West Coast time, so try not to call me super early or super late. And pop into my website and find me on socials and go look up Dana's Priceless Advice for Leaders of Volunteers on YouTube. And let me know what you thought of this presentation. I hope it serves all of you and you got a lot out of it. And I'm here for you. Volunteer Florida is here for you. And I'm really glad that you were with us today. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much, Dana, for joining us this afternoon or morning, your time. Hope everybody enjoyed this and got a little bit more comfortable with having some hard, maybe discussions with your volunteers. Just wanted to do a quick reminder before everyone jumps off. Please make sure to fill out the session survey. It can be found in the event tab in the attendee portal. If you are a general attendee, this ends today's session. We'll see you back tomorrow at 9 a.m. If you are a Volunteer Generation Fund grantee, I will see you at 2:45. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.